Hello. So, in that recent group session that we had, I mentioned a book that I really haven't heard anybody else discuss on like YouTube or really in general in regards to a lot of these manifesting ideas. And honestly, that's not that surprising because what becomes popular when it becomes to a lot of these manifesting concepts that we hear about on social media is the kind of stuff with the sensationalistic bend. And the philosophy of Emile Coué, at first glance is perhaps not as sensationalistic and as easy to get excited about, perhaps, as something like Neville's advice. Now, I think that's a really superficial interpretation of both of those teachers, by the way. I don't think Neville's advice is sensationalistic, and I don't think that Coué's advice should be hard to get excited about. I actually think we should get more excited usually about Coué's advice than the advice that Neville gives, because Coué's advice, if we actually apply it, for most of us is easier to do than Neville's advice. But anyway, Neville excites people. And because of that, he's a lot more popular than somebody like Emile Coué. Even though Emile Coué, as I've said time and time again, is a much more succinct, practical teacher of these points than Neville was. As great as Neville was as a manifesting teacher, the way he explains this stuff is a lot more dramatic and not going to work as well for the general population compared to somebody like Emile Coué. I love both those guys. I'm not making a harsh judgment against Neville when I say that. I love Neville. But, as we always talk about, as we were talking about recently, the way this stuff is explained online these days is just terrible, in my opinion. It's not honest. It's not truthful about how the process is likely going to be for you, at least long term. I'm not interested in you just manifesting back, your SP and then breaking up again because you haven't really changed yourself that much, or manifesting some money and then being broke again because you haven't really fixed that issue, a year from now, or, manifesting little things or significant things, but then having other problems in your life that are not resolved. I'm interested in you working on yourself so you resolve and become more at peace with these major life issues and feel better because of it and more fulfilled in your day-to-day life. And I think that Coué is often a better teacher to turn to than Neville when it comes to that. But they're both great to turn to. It's just don't listen to the popular Neville advice, which is all over YouTube, when it comes to applying his information, because it's going to probably guide you in this very warped direction, So the book that I never had heard mentioned, and I talked about the other day briefly on the group session, is Christianity and Autosuggestion by Cyrus Harry Brooks and Ernest Charles. This book came out right around Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion, right shortly after that, I believe. The Coué masterpiece, which in my opinion is the best law of attraction book of the 20th century. And what's so interesting about this book, Christianity and Autosuggestion, is that it connects Coué's, you can almost say, secular approach, where he doesn't use a lot of spiritual language. He just kind of replaces imagination as the catchphrase instead of saying God, right? It replaces it explores Coué's secular approach with Jesus's, you could say, religious approach, and it shows that there's many, many, many more similarities than differences between the two. And this also connects directly with how Neville talks about faith and believing in yourself and having faith, how Joseph Murphy talks about faith, and how they give all these biblical references. This book, Christianity and Autosuggestion, really links up a lot of this stuff. So I just wanted to read a couple excerpts from it today to give you an idea of what it's about and what it's pointing to a little bit. So so you can get a further understanding of the power of autosuggestion, why it works, why it doesn't work, how these principles can be employed in your life more effectively? Because that's really what it comes down to, in my opinion. It's like, how can we get this stuff to work more effectively in our lives? I don't care about the abstract theory that much. The abstract theory very well might be wrong, but if you can get something to work for you effectively in your life, well, that's something. That's correct, in my opinion. So, Brooks and Charles write, we have recognized that the process by which Jesus healed the man with a withered hand was at least accompanied by a gradual heightening of the man's expectancy of cure, while in Coué's case, a somewhat laborious technique was employed with the same end in view: the production of confident and intense expectancy. Now, this confident expectancy is frequently called in popular faith, in popular language, faith. And if we look through the records of the life of Jesus, we find that the word faith was continually upon his lips. He taught that faith was an absolute necessity to life, and that with faith, his disciplines could do works as mighty as his own, while without faith, they were powerless. We must try to ascertain what Jesus meant by faith and what was the relation of this faith to the confident expectancy, which is the means of healing employed in autosuggestion. So that's kind of what this book is about, but this also is kind of what the law of attraction is about. All these teachings, the last 100, 150 years that we hear about that are very popular today, that we hear about from Neville, that we hear about from Abraham Hicks, that we hear about in The Secret, that we hear about from all these different sources, so much of it boils down to this idea of having expectancy, the gradual heightening of expectancy and the production of confident and intense expectancy, which a lot of people call faith. You'll recall, and I'll put a link above, that Israel Regardie essay on Neville, how Regardie concluded that Neville's formulas and his approach worked so well because it was incredibly effective in arousing intense expectancy. It was, as Regardie said, autosuggestion done perfectly, done correctly. And that's a lot of what this book is about. Very interesting. And what's so interesting, too, is that Coué was able to arouse this intense expectancy and certainty that what you wanted to happen was going to happen without using all of this incredibly eloquent and evocative religious language. Now, that religious language is great, but not everybody's going to buy it. Coué used much more down-to-earth psychological language and still got people to buy it, or buy it even more. Later on, Brooks and Charles write this. He said, Coué said, "You're going to have confidence in yourself, and this confidence gives you the assurance that you can do perfectly well whatever you wish to do on condition that it is reasonable. A thing is reasonable only if it is in harmony with the laws of life, and if it is in harmony with the laws of life, it must also be in harmony, in a limited and human degree, with the laws of God. But there is no need to press this point unduly, for we catch a glimpse of the same principle in Coué's law of subconscious teleology. We are told that in formulating particular suggestions, we must first see that their object is sanctioned by the reason, and that being so, we must envisage the end and goal to which we wish to attain, making no attempt to impose on the unconscious the means by which it is to be reached, but leaving all such questions of detail to be settled by the unconscious itself. Autosuggestion should be as general, as undefined as possible. In its best form, it should be an upward motion of the mind, fixing its attention on a goal universally approved, not spending its energy in personal likes and dislikes and pursuing momentary egotistical desires. Is not the affinity obvious between this conception of autosuggestion and the rule which confines prayer to such matters as are concordant with the divine character? If God is goodness, a motion towards goodness is a motion towards Him. Autosuggestion has sometimes been called praying to oneself. So it is, but it is prayer to a deeper, truer self, to which Coué calls the power within. In our view, that power within is God, whether we recognize the fact or not. God permits us to use his power even when we deny that it is his power, just as a flower thrives in the sun without knowing the source of its vitality. And so when we formulate autosuggestions, we are praying to God under the impression that we are appealing to some power of our own mind. It is sometimes said that according to the new psychology, religion is nothing more than autosuggestion. We would reply that autosuggestion is nothing more than religion unaware of itself. Prayer, we submit, is an appeal, not to God of some faraway heaven, but to God in our own hearts. And as such, it is indistinguishable from normal autosuggestion, except in one inestimably vital respect, the recognition of divine agency. Prayer, our daily prayer, says Dr. Horton, whether it's at times or ejaculatory, should be, in effect, the constant autosuggestion of Christ's presence and Christ's sufficiency, and the assertion of faith that we can be like him and are by his grace, the indwelling of his spirit, becoming like him. That excerpt is unbelievable. I'm sorry if I didn't read it perfectly, but that's an unbelievable excerpt. I would listen to it again. I would read this book, Christianity and Autosuggestion. So, in other words, Coué basically, by saying your imagination does it, the power within your imagination, that's synonymous with God. That's why, you always hear me like going back and forth using all this spiritual language, talking about God, and then using this more psychological language, why I like both, because we're really saying the same thing. When I say be present and recognize now the present, the perfection of the present, I'm really saying recognize God. When we do something like the absolute method, we're recognizing God. The power within your imagination is God. It's just not this, very limited religious narrative of, a man with a beard up in the sky. It's God being everything. It's being goodness, true goodness, transcendent goodness. G-O-O-D is also just G-O-D. So this book really points to that. And I just don't think most people who are on YouTube looking at these ideas are really that serious about them in this way. But if you're watching this channel, I think you probably are, because this channel is meant for people who really want to apply these ideas in their life. And in all likelihood are pretty spiritual. But you don't have to be spiritual to appreciate Coué. However, we can obviously make the connection between spirituality and psychological autosuggestion very easily. And the passages I just read illustrate that. So I hope that helps. I hope that clarifies for you some of this stuff. If you need more clarification, more help, you can get coaching from me at radicalcounselor.com. And until next time, enjoy yourself.